all of you are probably very well aware from being involved in the writing and the review process. This is time consuming and resource intensive and actually quite challenging. So it's vital that we remember our confidentiality to ensure the integrity of the process and also to make sure that it's a fair approach for the profession. So just a little reminder on that. So let's just remind ourselves of a few key things. So it is a statutory process and it is in the legislation. So the Pharmacy Act 2007 introduced mandatory CPD for pharmacists. The IOP was established then by the PSI to oversee the management and delivery of this system, which includes ePortfolio, ePortfolio review, and practice review. So the legislation is really clear in what it wants practice review to be. And I suppose we have seen this before, but it is no harm in reminding ourselves of the fact that it is in legislation. And I suppose the main thing I'd like to draw your attention to here is that it outlines that practice review needs to evaluate the competencies dealing with patient care. So that's 4 competencies: clinical knowledge, gathering information, patient management, and education, and communication skills. So practice review was designed on the basis of this. So it was developed so that it evaluated these 4 competency areas. So what does it look like? So we all know that it's got 2 components. So the standardized pharmacy interactions, or SPIs as we call them, and the clinical knowledge review, or CKR. So the clinical knowledge review does what it says on the tin. So it's looking at the first competency of clinical knowledge. Now we will be focusing on the SPIs as that's what our role will be. If anyone wants any further information on clinical knowledge review, of course get in touch, but I am conscious of your time this evening, so we'll focus on the SPIs. So the SPIs are essentially simulated pharmacy cases. All of the cases are designed to be reflective of situations with which pharmacists practicing in patient-facing roles would be expected to be capable of dealing. So just remember, we're looking at baseline competence. We're not trying to catch the pharmacist out. So the cases should be straightforward. They should allow the pharmacist or the participant a chance to demonstrate their competence in the 3 competency areas of gathering information, patient management, and communication skills. So these are the areas that you'll be reviewing. So each pharmacist, as you'll remember, will have their own consultation room where they'll stay for the duration of the component. They have a desk with a laptop and access to online resources. And the actor, who will be playing the role of a patient or maybe a healthcare professional, is coming in and out of the consultation room for each scenario. As the practice reviewer, you are also going in and out to different consultation rooms, and the pharmacist will remain in their room. So this gives them a chance to settle throughout the day. There's 8 minutes assigned to each case, and feedback from the practice review was that 8 minutes was plenty of time to deal with each case. In fact, a lot of pharmacists said 8 minutes was actually a luxury to have uninterrupted with one patient, as it's rarely the case in practice. As I'm sure you'll all remember, there's a practice scenario first. So you will all be acting as a practice reviewer for this case. You will be ticking off the checklist, I suppose, but this scenario does not count for the review, so it won't officially be marked. What it does is it gives the pharmacist the opportunity to get used to the setup, to relax into the day, to become familiar with their settings, to the resources they have at hand, to how the whole thing feels. We want to make it as close to practice as possible, but there's no denying that it is an artificial environment for participants. So following the practice case then, there are 7 real SPI cases, and each of you will have one of these scenarios you'll be reviewing. So this slide I think is a good slide to show how they're marked then really. So after the practice run, there's the 7 interactions with patients and or healthcare professionals. And I suppose the thing to remember is that all these interactions are looking at baseline level of competence. They're straightforward scenarios designed by pharmacists. So as you can see here, it outlines the 7 SPI stations, and you can see the 3 competencies, so gathering information, management strategies, and communication skills. And you can see that these competencies are marked across all 7 interactions. So the main thing to take away from this slide then I suppose if you find a pharmacist maybe forgot to gather information, for example, in an SPI which you were reviewing, they may not receive the checklist points or global rating in that SPI, but they do have 6 other SPIs in which they can make this up, so to speak. It's their collective score for gathering information that counts. So all you can do is review the one station that you were with them for. And chances are many pharmacists might have 1 or 2 stations that maybe they don't perform in as well as they would have liked, but they do have the other stations to make it up. This is really reassuring for the pharmacists in that one station won't make or break them, but it's also really reassuring for you. You need to remain objective and mark what you see, but keep in mind that they may perform better in other stations, and so your review of this single station won't be the making or breaking of them. So I think that's a helpful slide to show how it's marked across all of the stations. Now, I'm sure you'll all remember, but this is what the checklist looks like. So it's broken down into the 3 sections. You can see the gathering information section at the top in the green, followed by the management strategies and patient education in blue, and finally the communication skills at the very bottom. You might also be able to spot, it is quite small, but you may be able to spot that the global rating in red at the end of each section. You can also notice on the side that there's a binary scale for the observable checklist points, and then the 3-point scale for the communication skills, and we will come back to that. But it's just a visual reminder of what the checklists look like. Just a few practical tips around the checklist and how to fill it in. So it's really important that when we're marking them that we put a line through the lozenge as opposed to a tick. So they are marked on, they go through a computer system. So it's important that they are done the same way and that we all mark them the same way. That there's no writing around the edges, the paper isn't folded, and that we use the pencil that we're given as well. Really important that we fill in all the sections, so complete your name and number in the assessor box. Always really important to check the pharmacist participant number or name, so to make sure that we're using the right checklist for the right pharmacist. And feedback from yourselves is it's really important to leave the not demonstrated lozenges or boxes at the very end of the interaction. I suppose you never know when a pharmacist may think of something at the very end, and it's easier than having to rub them out. So in the morning of practice review, we will have time to get familiar with our checklists again. Helpful tips from yourselves actually previously is to fill in your name and number beforehand. So to use that time in the morning of practice review to have that step done, as it can save you time then when you feel a little bit more under pressure as we go through the SPI stations. To take time to become familiar with your packs. So you'll remember in the morning of practice review, you have your practice reviewer pack in the green folder. What's included in that is everyone will have 2 checklists for the practice case. So one for the morning circuit and one for the afternoon circuit, as well as the cases that you're reviewing. It's helpful to keep these checklists in order, as they'll be given to you in the order that you'll be seeing the participants. There's also spare checklists in case you need them. What we did in October is we had a pink checklist provided as well, and this was really useful to provide any feedback. So it was helpful in the moment, maybe the morning of when you have time with the actor and the other practice reviewer who's using that case, or maybe throughout the day you think of things that a pharmacist does or says that needs to be taken into consideration, maybe if it was to be used again. It also saves us hanging on to you too late for the debrief in the afternoons, because all the feedback is readily available in the one spot. So there's 3 key sections. So the 3 core competencies that are looked at in the SPIs. So gathering information, management strategies, follow-up to include patient education, and communication, including counselling skills. So that's the scope of the SPIs. They're the 3 competencies that are being measured. So for the first 2 sections, gathering information and management strategies, the checklist items are broken down into the analytical checklist and the global rating. We'll go through those in a moment, but this slide is just to highlight that both are measured in a binary system. So yes, demonstrated, or no, not demonstrated. Whereas the communication skills is a little bit different. So the analytical checklists are broken down into a 3-point scale. So that's based on feedback from yourselves that it was quite challenging actually to use a binary scale for the communication skills, whereas the global rating will remain the same as a demonstrated or not demonstrated overall. So I will go through the global rating and the analytical checklist in a little bit more detail now. So this is just to show you the 3-point scale for communication skills. And so feedback from yourselves has it's a little bit easier to measure. I suppose communication skills can be a little bit more challenging. It's not a defined observable checklist point as such, in terms of it can often be easier maybe for the gathering information or the management strategies. The communication skills can prove a little bit more difficult. So feedback from yourselves was that the 3-point scale was, I suppose, easier to manage in October. So let's remind ourselves, what is the analytical checklist? So it provides a method for reviewing a pharmacist's performance objectively. It's based on a series of observable actions that pharmacists may be expected to display. So the analytical checklist lists these tasks and behaviours, and then you, the practice reviewer, will record whether or not these points are observed by marking them as yes or no for the top 2 competencies, so gathering information and management strategies, or on a scale of 0, 1, 2 for communication skills. So that's what the analytical checklist is. And then, in addition to these checklist points, there's also a global rating for each of the competencies. And this gives you a chance to consider the performance of the pharmacist in that section as a whole while keeping the checklist points in mind. So it's independent of the checklist, and it gives you a chance to consider that the performance of the pharmacist in the section as a whole. So just to be really clear about the global rating and what it is we mean when we say that it's independent of the checklist. I know sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to assign the global rating for a few pharmacists. And after looking at the way the results are analysed, the psychometrician gave us some feedback that might help you with how to assign the rating as demonstrated or not demonstrated. So one of the main factors he mentioned is that even though the global rating is independent of the checklist points, you would expect a correlation between the checklist points and the global rating. The global rating shouldn't be a contradiction of the checklist points. So let's consider both sides of the scale. So let's say a pharmacist gets no or very few checklist points in a particular section. The expectation there would be that the global rating should really be not demonstrated. On the other hand, if a pharmacist gets all of the checklist points in a particular section, the expectation there would be that the global rating is definitely demonstrated. A helpful thing to think of is, oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. Bear with me. So just of note here, so let's say the pharmacist says or does something of concern, something that worries you, something that maybe isn't right. This should be documented on the back of the form, so on the incident form on the back of the checklist, instead of being reflected in their global rating score. So Richard, the psychometrician, gave us an example that might be an extreme example, but I think it's an effective one to show this. The pharmacist gets all the checklist points, every single one for management strategies, but then punches the patient in the face. So they still get all of the checklist points. So they have demonstrated competence in management strategies for the patient. Of course, they've acted wholly inappropriately, so it will be documented on the incident form. So it's just, it can be helpful to think of that slightly strong anecdote to think of the difference between the global rating and something that should be documented on the incident form. So I think this slide is a really helpful thing to think of when we're trying to assign a global rating, maybe for some of the more challenging cases. So sometimes it can be really clear, and other times it can take a little bit more thought. So, for example, you could ask yourself, Overall, has the pharmacist demonstrated competence in, for example, gathering information from and about the patient? So if no, they're not demonstrated, and if yes, it demonstrated. But then to take a moment and challenge yourself and think, do the checklist points received contradict this? So even though I thought they were very good, if they actually got 0 of the checklist points in that area, just to think and challenge ourselves on that thought. So I think that can be really helpful if ever you are struggling. Now, sometimes, as I said, it can be really clear, and sometimes it takes a little bit more thought, but that can be a helpful tool to use. So based on feedback, the gathering information management strategies can actually be a lot clearer to mark because they're clearly defined, observable actions, where the communication skills can be a little bit more challenging. So I just want to spend a minute or two going through the communication skills part of the analytical checklist. So in the communication skills section, we're looking at 4 key areas. So the pharmacist should be able to respond to the patient needs and cues in a perceptive and genuine manner to be able to demonstrate empathy for the patient's feelings and needs. They should have control of the interaction with the patient and demonstrate flexibility when required in terms of their coherence in the interaction. Their verbal expression will include things like grammar and tone, the volume of their voice, the rate of speech, while the nonverbal expression will include things like eye contact, gestures, and maybe the use of silence. So as I've mentioned, obviously, there has been a change to the communication skills of the checklist for this practice review. So instead of the binary scale as a yes or no, it's now a 3-point scale. So that should make it a little bit easier to mark the communication skills point. And this is what that looks like. So you see that it goes from 0 to 2. We also have this tool available in your practice reviewer packs for the day. And feedback from previous practice reviews were that you found this quite helpful for pharmacists that you were unsure of. So quite often it can be very clear. For example, you may see, and I remember some of you mentioning last time, a really exemplary interaction. And straight away, you've no doubt that the pharmacist has demonstrated competence in all areas and has actually really excelled in all aspects of communication skills. However, there's other scenarios that can be a little bit less clear or a little muddier, so to speak. And this can be where this tool can be helpful. So it's just a reminder that this is available for you in your practice reviewer packs on the day, and it's something that you can use if you are struggling to assign whether it's maybe a 2 or a 1 or a 0 or a 1, or where exactly you feel that that person has performed. So it's just to make you aware and to remind you that that is available for you in your packs. Another thing to highlight, and I'm sure you are all aware of it from previously, is the difference between IE versus EG. So IE means that the participant should use a specific point in a specific way. So maybe establishes the presenting complaint, i.e. migraine headaches. So there would be an expectation that the pharmacist would use that term, migraine headaches. EG then should be used to provide an example of what could or might be said to address the checklist points. What we found is that actually quite often pharmacists have a wide range of ways of maybe describing things or using different terms for things while covering the exact same information. So it's important that we use our common sense with these points as well. So for example, in practice review in April, I believe, one of the checklist points was establishes the presenting complaint, i.e. hemorrhoids. And actually what the practice reviewers who were marking that station found was most pharmacists actually use the term piles instead of hemorrhoids. And of course, they should still receive the checklist point for that. So we are trying to limit the use of IE to avoid any such confusion. But we do have a large case bank of cases, and older cases may still have a lot of IEs as opposed to EGs. I suppose the most important thing I want to highlight here is that it's important we take a standardized approach to the SPIs. So on the morning of practice review, please go through the checklist and highlight any areas where there's potential for confusion and agree the approach to take. So once we take a standardized and fair approach throughout the SPIs, that'll be perfect. So it's just something to be aware of. So I mentioned this earlier, and I just want to come back to it because it is important that you know where and when these should be used. So the incident form is there for you to document anything that you feel should be captured, anything you think may have a bearing on a participant's performance on the day. So on the back of each checklist, there is an incident form. So maybe if the incident is particularly relevant to your SPI, that can be a good place to document it. The IIOP staff member and the facilitators on your floor will also have general incident forms which can be used. So there are two places for incident forms. So maybe if you feel it's a big incident, maybe you're under time pressure and you don't have time to record it all, that we are there to help as well. So if we can document any incidents for you. Just a note here that the sentences or the wording on the back or in these incident forms, unfortunately, that can't be changed. So I suppose just to be aware that you're happy that whatever you're writing may be shared. So these incident forms will all be gathered and collated and brought to the practice review board meeting. So in case there's any particular incident that relates to a participant that may be borderline between demonstrated or not demonstrated for a particular competency, that those incidents may be taken into consideration. So it is really important that we document any incident that you feel may have a bearing on a participant's performance. So as I mentioned earlier when talking about the global rating, this is where you would document something that was of concern. So as I said earlier, if the pharmacist maybe punches the patient in the face, so an out there example, but that's what we would use the incident form for. Also, what we have found is often maybe depending on the SPI station in particular, or maybe just depending on the pharmacist, pharmacists may ask you to leave early. So of course, that's absolutely no problem, but it would be important that we do document that. So that will be a good in to document on the back of your SPI checklist. I know the timing between the stations can feel a little bit tight, but I suppose you do have that little bit of flexibility if they have asked you to leave early. So just a simple sentence, participant asked me to leave early. So it's just that we do document that on the back of the forms as well. You're all really good for it in October, but just a gentle reminder. So that leads me nicely into what to do if a pharmacist does ask you to leave early. So confirm that they're happy for you to leave, whatever language you feel comfortable with. And it is really important that we do advise them that by leaving, that means that the station is then over, so that you can't come back in if they think of something else to add. So feedback from the pharmacist is that it's actually really useful if the practice review remains. And we do provide that feedback to participants going into the review as well. Because quite often, if you're sitting there for another minute or so, there may be something else that you think of, and of course that means you might get an extra checklist point. So we do advise them that it can be quite helpful if the practice review remains, but of course depending on the pharmacist, they may be totally happy that they're finished with the interaction and they may want an extra minute or two in peace. So James, if you wouldn't mind, I just have a video to play. We have three very kind actors who played this out for us, and it's just a really nice, I suppose, collegial way of handling it if somebody does ask you to leave early. Thanks, James.
Okay, I'm happy if you want to leave now.
Okay, that's no bother. Just to make you aware that if I do leave, the station's over, and anything that you say after that we can't obviously mark.
That's fine, no problem. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. So thanks to Dermot and Sinead and Paula for your performance for us. But it's something that I suppose you probably all have seen. Maybe in October it can happen, maybe depending on the scenario or the particular pharmacist. But it's just important that we do remember to be really collegial and friendly with the participants. I suppose just to put them at ease. But it's important that they do know that you can come back in case they think of anything else that they'd like to add. So thanks guys for being our actors for that. So in terms of the conflict of interest, thank you all for filling out the conflict of interest declarations and getting them back to us so quickly. In line with the conflict of interest policy, quite often it's just noting down the conflict of interest in itself that's enough. And of course, then we will look at those that potentially we do need to act on. So we are in the process of that at the minute. So thank you all for your time in filling those out for us. I suppose one thing just to highlight with yourselves as well is that we do highlight with participants that pharmacy is a small profession, and the reality is that you may know a practice reviewer on the day, and it's, I suppose, not something to throw you off or to be concerned about. So if there is an actual conflict, of course we will do our best to separate the practice reviewer and participant. But actually we've had some nice feedback that sometimes recognizing someone can actually put someone at ease, that they can be delighted to see a friendly face, so that a smile and a hello or a kind word can actually go a long way. So while sometimes it may feel like a disadvantage, other times it can be really reassuring for pharmacists to see a friendly face or somebody they know. But of course, if there are any actual conflicts of interest, we will act on those with Zara as well. So thank you all very much for filling them out for us. So now that we've covered quite a lot of what the practice reviewer role is, this is just a helpful slide to remind us, I suppose, what it is and what it isn't. So what is involved is to evaluate the interaction using observable, measurable evidence. So to use the analytical checklist and global rating methods to evaluate the performance, to remain consistent in the interpretation of the checklist points, to make sure that we're fair for each and every pharmacist over the 2 days. To use your best judgment, be unbiased, and always be mindful of candidate care on the day as well. Because as we all know, they are incredibly nervous, and that is totally understandable. So anything we can do to put them at ease on the day really goes a long way. What it isn't then, so what's out of scope of the role, and it can be important to remember this too, is that we can't assume what the pharmacist is thinking. Unfortunately, only what they say and do, so observable, measurable evidence. Not to prompt or redirect the pharmacist if they're going off track, because that means that one pharmacist is getting an unfair advantage over the other. Important not to answer any questions relating to the SPI from the pharmacist. So sometimes I know if your maybe station is quite often done under the 8 minutes, pharmacists may want to start a conversation with you. So I suppose just to be open to friendly collegial talk, but to make sure we're not talking about the SPIs. So that's just a little reminder of what the role is. So I'd just like to take a minute and talk about, so how was Practice Review 2018? So April 2019 will be our 3rd ever Practice Review, so we've had 2 full runs of it. We've had about 130 pharmacists undertake Practice Review in 2018. And of those 130 pharmacists, 97.7% of participants demonstrated competence in each of the competencies. That really is an excellent achievement. It's a statutory process, and the fact that over 97% of those who participated demonstrated competence, it really is something the profession should be proud of. On top of this, there's actually other positives from Practice Review as well. We've received quite good feedback from many of the participants. And I suppose, especially with the first one, it's hard to know because it's unknown territory. There's a lot of fear, trepidation about the process. So for people who were genuinely nervous, people who would have rang us before the review, people who would have been visibly nervous on the day, and even after the event, before they received their results, would have been in contact, worried. However, a lot of them, after receiving their outcomes and on reflection, were really happy. They felt really confident after the review. It had increased their confidence in their own ability. And actually, we now have quite a lot of people who have been through practice review who want to get involved in the process. They've become peer support pharmacists because they want to spread the word and dispel fears. They want to get involved in case writing, case review, practice review. We have 2 face-to-face event shows coming up in March, and we have 2 participants in Dublin who went through practice review in October, and 2 who will go to the Limerick event who've been through it and want to share their experience with pharmacists who've been called for the next review. So it's really amazing to see people who have been through it and want to get involved and help with the process going forward. We're definitely not saying that all the feedback received is positive. I'll also go through some of the more balanced feedback, but genuinely an underlying theme from all pharmacists on the day itself was that they felt supported. They found it was an atmosphere of mutual respect and there was a collegial atmosphere. They were genuinely happy to be reviewed by peers, so pharmacists like themselves who knew the reality of practicing as a patient-facing pharmacist. Not one pharmacist said they felt they were being judged or disrespected. They felt supported and encouraged. And this is something that you all as practice reviewers can definitely be proud of. So we definitely want to, we're hoping to have the similar experience again. So thank you all for that. It really does make a difference to participants going through the review. So here's some of the feedback, I suppose more the positive toned feedback from practice review. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's always feedback around the logistics. So some people think it should be on a weekday, some people think it should be on weekends, that it should be longer or shorter, there should be more breaks or less breaks. Often it can be a little bit contradictory and a little bit hard to act on therefore, but it always brings up things that we can improve on and look to change. But here's just some of the positive feedback in terms of the impact it's had on people's practice. So feeling more confident, becoming more aware of their patient counselling and how much time they spend with patients. So they're really positive things. Of course, we get the more balanced feedback as well. I suppose one piece of feedback from the October review that I think would be, I suppose, quite relevant as practice reviewers was that the experience is, as much as we want it to be realistic, it does feel a little bit artificial. So one participant said that they've never sat across a table to talk with a patient, and that's something that I suppose we had thought of, but it's hard to implement because then they feel that they have to stand for the whole time, which is quite a long time as well. But it definitely does feel uncomfortable for some people. It's not what they're used to. One participant said that the actors did a fairly good job, but they lacked the input of a patient who's interested and has questions that need to be answered. They said the interaction flows more naturally with the genuine patient. And I suppose that's something that maybe as practice reviewers we can help as well, so that time in the morning that we're with the actors, that we can share those pieces of knowledge with them and make sure we do the best we can by the pharmacists on the day. So it's important that we get this feedback, and we do always try to act on the feedback, but it's nice and reassuring to get that positive impact on practice, that people go away and it has improved their practice, it has improved their confidence in their own abilities, and it is something that we do hear time and time again. So I suppose that's a nice thing to hear from practice review. So now to get into the nitty-gritty of the logistics of practice review. So what will it look like on the 6th and 7th of April? So roughly a month from now. So this is what it'll look like for the participants. So they'll arrive from about 10 o'clock for registration. There'll be an orientation to tell them about how the day will go and any tips we can give them. They'll be split into 2 groups, so Group A and B. Group A will complete the SPI component in the morning, and Group B will complete the CKOR component in the morning. There'll be a break for lunch, and then they'll complete the other component in the afternoon. There is a chance for them to give any feedback in the moment the day of, but we do try to keep the debrief a little bit shorter for them. And this is what it will look like for yourselves. So we have an earlier start. So from 8 o'clock in the morning, we'll have teas and coffees, give you all a chance to arrive and settle in. Then the next part is a really important part of the day. So it's time that we've dedicated for the practice reviewer and the actor to become familiar with the SPI. So you'll get the practice case, and you'll get the details of your case for that day. And this is really crucial timing to become familiar with the SPI cases and with the actor as well. We'll give you time for a break then, and then we'll go and we'll do the circuit for the morning. We'll have a lunch and then the circuit again for the evening. So the SPI Group 1 and Group 2. So that's roughly what the day will look like. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about this really important time between 8 and 10, the morning of practice review. So you'll each get a practice reviewer pack that contains the checklist for your SPI, the spare checklist, and a pink checklist for the feedback. You'll also get the checklist for the practice case. So each of you will be reviewing the practice case first, as everyone will get a chance to do the practice case first, settle the nerves, and then you'll get your checklist for your actual case for the day. Because of the need for everyone to get their practice case, it does mean that we will have spare practice reviewers. What I will say is if you're spare on day 1, you won't be on day 2, and it's so important that you are there on the day. So we do need you, and we will use you, and we do appreciate you being there. So it's so important to use this time in the morning carefully, to familiarize yourself with the checklist, to practice the case and see how the checklist plays out. Really important to role play the scenario in a variety of ways. So to be really inquisitive. Maybe the first time you play it out, it's as you would have done it, and maybe to stop and think, oh, another pharmacist may come at this from a different angle, or may say this in a different way, and how will that affect the checklist? So really look at the checklist, question it, think, are there any points that are confusing? Are there any IEs there that potentially a pharmacist could use a different term for? And how are we going to manage that? So there'll be 2 practice reviewers and 2 actors who have the same case, and you'll have time to talk these things through, to role play them, to see how it's going to play out, and maybe to provide any additional information the actor may need to help them in their role as well. This is another place that the spare practice reviewers play a really key role. So the spare practice reviewers will get the checklist for each SPI case, and you have the challenging role of becoming familiar with all of the cases. And a really helpful way to do this is in that time in the morning to go around and role play the cases blind for the practice reviewers who are looking after that case for the day, who will be reviewing that case for the day. It gives them a chance to see another pharmacist come at it from another angle, and it also gives you a chance to become familiar with the checklist. So I definitely encourage you all to use that time wisely, as it is really key for the success of the day. So just to mention in terms of the operational overview, so Sarah are there for us. They're really familiar with I suppose different types of reviews of exams, undergraduate, postgraduate, so they've seen it all. They'll be there to provide guidance, they'll be there to manage the rotational logistics, and also to collate and gather the checklists. Each of you will have a designated facilitator who will be there and will be paired with you with your SPI, and they'll manage the props and they'll be there to support as well. You'll each have your actor, and also there'll be an IAOP staff member on each floor there to provide any insider guidance as needed. In terms of the timings, so there's 2 circuits and 9 pharmacists per circuit. So all 9 pharmacists will complete the practice run or the trial run SPI at the same time. so that they're all given the same chance to become familiar with the concept. After the practice case is complete, there'll be 7 SPIs, 7 of the actual SPIs, and 2 break stations. There's 8 minutes per station. As I said, feedback from the participants is that it's more than enough time to complete the station. As I'm sure you'll remember, there's a 2-minute remaining notification. So a bell will go off to indicate to the pharmacist that they have 2 minutes remaining. So this gives them a chance to keep an eye on time. There's also the end of station notification to notify the pharmacist when the station has ended. There's then 2 minutes between the stations. So this gives you a chance to leave the room, to mark in any of the not demonstrated lozenges or marks on the checklist, maybe make any notes on the back if necessary, and to prepare for the next station. The facilitator then will be able to guide you to the next station, so you don't need to worry about where you're going. The facilitator will also move the props and collect the checklist at that point. We would advise that you try and complete the checklist before you leave the room if possible, as it's nice even to have a mental break before you go into the next person. And I know those 2 minutes can seem a little bit tight, but we haven't had any problems in the last practice reviews. So I know that was a lot of information, and I know you're all very experienced, but does anybody have any questions? Was anything in any ways unclear? Or is there anything I can provide any further information on? Perfect. Well, it was, as I said, our first time delivering this over a webinar. It does feel a little bit strange not to be able to see your faces or have discussion around these things. So I hope it was helpful. I hope you all feel confident and ready for the role in April. I can't believe how quick it's flying around. If any of you have any questions or on reflection think anything was in any ways unclear or would like to discuss anything in any further detail, you have my number, you have my email. Just get in contact. That's what we're here for. I will be in contact again in the run-up, probably about 7 to 10 days before the event, with the specifics of where we'll meet and everything. But please, in the meantime, if anybody wants to, please get in touch. That's what we're here for. And thank you again. We really couldn't do this without you, so it's a genuine thank you from me. And yes, stay in touch, and please feel free to ask any questions that you have. And if anyone has any feedback on the idea of giving it over a webinar, also be very interested to hear, but drop me an email anytime. I don't want to keep anyone unnecessarily long on a Monday evening. So thank you all so much. Lovely to talk to myself. But thank you very much.